Hello, welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In this video, as you can tell from the title, I'm going to be talking about the books I read throughout February. I can't believe it's already going to be March already, even though we've had a leap year, which means that February is longer than usual, but apparently not, because it's still only like 3 days in the whole of January and February combined. Anyway, still managed to read a decent amount of books. So I'm going to run through those with you now, and I'm going to tell you what I thought of them, and I'm going to tell you whether I'm going to be continuing the series or anything like that with them. The first book on this list is When Your Family Says No by Leah, and I think her last name is Martin, though it is only signed off by Leah. This covers the story, it's a memoir of a woman growing up as a child in a very Orthodox Jewish family. Her father is the kind of pinnacle of Orthodox Jews, very strict with the religion. Therefore, her growing up results in her having some kind of strict beliefs about how life should be. Then essentially what happens is as she grows older, she gets to about 20, 21 years old, she falls in love with a man from her work who is not only somebody her parents probably wouldn't approve of, but is not even Jewish. She leaves the Jewish community, she goes off and she goes to live with this man, and her eyes are opened to what else the world can offer and the fact that things don't have to be quite strict as her family had once said. What that results in is her family essentially disowning her, deciding that they don't really want a lot to do with her, and even some of her kind of cousins and things just become so distant. People that she thought were kind of essentially her best friends in life have become so distant with her because of her choice to leave the religion or go against the beliefs of the religion. She doesn't even leave the religion, she wants to be Jewish. And she talks about how she wants her children to grow up knowing that she is Jewish and they have a choice whether they want to be Jewish or not. So it's very interesting. It's fascinating from somebody who doesn't really understand the Jewish religion. I've never looked into it a lot. So to be able to learn it through the eyes of somebody who's been in the depths of it and has kind of come out of it and seen it from the outside as well is really, really fascinating. So I ended up giving this a 4.25 out of 5 on my blog. That is When Your Family Says No by Leah Martin. The next book on this list is White Nights by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Now, he did Crime and Punishment and The Idiot. I've not read either of those. I started The Idiot, but it was Christmas and I didn't want that sort of high-level reading at that time, so I gave up on it. White Nights is a much smaller book, as you can see. It's a novella. I think it's only about 90 pages. It's a love story that I saw going around on social media at the time. Covers a man who meets a woman at a bridge. She's crying, he asks why, they end up falling in love. She tells him that there's another man in her life, but this other man has possibly left, so he shouldn't need to worry. The other man comes back and it causes all sorts of problems. And what we've got here is the shortest depiction of the best and the worst parts of love in a novella. And Fyodor Dostoevsky is very famous for his writing, very famous for managing to write about things and express terms and feelings and emotions and ideals in a much smaller amount of text than many other writers. Very interesting book. I'm not sure I recommend it to many people. It's a very difficult read. The fact it's only 90 pages was a bit of a blessing. It's not dull, it's just written in such a way where you're like, what is going on? Why is this happening? Why is that happening? But then when you finish it, you see it as a whole and you understand what Fyodor Dostoevsky was trying to get through there. Very interesting book. I believe I gave it a 4.25 out of 5 on my blog. The next book was Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. Now, this is the sequel to Red Rising by Pierce Brown, which I think you can see just about here. That needs to be put up vertically. I don't know why it's just laying there like it doesn't belong. This is, as I said, the sequel. Now, Red Rising, the end of Red Rising really, really impressed me. I think the whole book in general really impressed me. Pierce Brown's writing, how he just jumped from action to action really impressed me. Didn't worry too much about politics at the time. This one worried way too much about politics. It's still a great book. There's still plenty of action, but I just felt I was listening to an audiobook and most of the time I was just listening to people talk about how bad the world was or how bad the politics was, these sorts of things. And I just found myself thinking, just get to it. There is a twist at the end. There is some moments at the end towards the latter half that are like, wow, yes, brilliant. That's what I wanted for the rest of it. But I just felt like the rest of the book really just filled out pages. And I'm not sure. It didn't really resonate with me the same way that Red Rising did. However, I did give it the same rating that I gave Red Rising, because I gave Red Rising a 4.25 out of 5, because I thought Golden Sun was then going to be a 4.5 or a 4.75 based on the fact that everybody I had heard read it said it was utterly fantastic and way better than the first one. However, I've given this a 4.25 out of 5 on my blog as well, because as I said, There is elements of how good the Red Rising was in there. I felt like Red Rising started off slowly, and then had a fantastic second half. And I felt like this kind of almost fell into that as well. And that's not what you want from a sequel. You don't need to slowly build things up. You want to jump straight back into the action and continue with the action. And that didn't really happen here. Still a good read. If you enjoyed Red Rising, you'll probably enjoy this. Just don't expect it to be as good as everybody says this then is. So that would kind of be my feedback if you're reading The Golden, or just Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. The next book I read was One Day by David Nichols. Now, this is going all over social media at the moment because of the TV series on Netflix. Now, my partner started watching the TV series on Netflix and she said, did you know there's a book based on this? I'd never heard of it. Don't know, apologies. Now I've heard of it. Unbelievable. One of my favourite books of all time. There, I said it. That's one of my favourite books of all time. It depicts true love like I've never really read about properly. So it depicts Dexter and Emma, and they are two very normal people. Dexter's a little bit posh, Emma's a little bit not posh. And throughout 20 years or so, they meet at graduation. They meet each other every now and then, and they just have these lovely moments with each other. But as they grow older, they grow more distant, they have deep conversations, and they truly are each other's kind of fallback, and they understand each other better than anybody else will ever understand them, and they begin to understand that. It's a heartbreaking story, and I don't want to tell you why, but it's a story that really, really makes you appreciate, if you have loved ones, why you love them. It is set kind of in the late 80s, 90s and early noughties, so if that's your kind of era of when you were growing up, you're going to resonate with this so well because it's set in England. So a lot of the things that were happening at the time in terms of culture, in terms of like video games, music, what was cool, TV, these sort of things, they're all in here. And even somebody who was only born in the 90s and then grew up in the noughties, I felt kind of this was like the best of your childhood and the best of being in your 20s. I'm only 29 now, but there's an element of this that just makes you feel something that I don't think a book has really ever made me feel before. There's nothing spectacular about the plot. There's no unbelievable moments. There are some big moments, especially towards the end, but the point I'm trying to get there is that this isn't going to be blowing your mind at every stage. You're just going to adore the whole journey. You're going to be frustrated at times. You're going to be confused at times. You're going to wish Dexter did this and Emma did that, and then not, and then suddenly they are, and it's going to be unbelievable. And that's what happens. One of the best books I've ever read. 4.7 out of 5, because I don't give any book a 5, because nothing is perfect. The next book on this list is The List of Suspicious Things. It's the Suspicious List. No, I'm not going to do the joke. By Jenny Godfrey. This was kindly sent to me by Jenny and her PR team. This was recommended to me as my book I should read in February. So I did a thing on my Instagram and Twitter a while back where I said, everybody recommend one book they should, I think I definitely need to read in 2024. I picked 12 of those based on the most popular, liked, and that sort of thing. And I set one for each month of the year. This was February's. This was brilliant. It's about a young girl called Miv, who is a young girl who is set in 1979 when at the height of the Yorkshire Ripper. She decides she wants to start making lists to see if she can help find the Yorkshire Ripper. She puts suspects all around town. She puts places she thinks could have been at some of the murder areas and to look into, that sort of thing. And along the way, she kind of grows up. She has a coming of age story. Her best friend starts to change a little bit. They make friends with boys, which have never done before. They start to see adults in a different light. They aren't these kind of superheroes that you should admire to be or aspire to be even. They are just regular human beings, and some of them are quite dark and some of them are quite bad, and that's what's really interesting about this book. And then there's a moment which I was not expecting, because everything was kind of okay and I was fine. I thought the book was going to end, that broke my damn heart and was like, okay, that just shot this book into a different stratosphere of how good this is. I'd heard a lot of hype about it. If you speak to anybody about this, they're going to say the same thing. The front cover is beautiful. I'm really a fan of kind of minimalist single image covers. This kind of, you can see how it's a notebook here depicting a list. Brilliant. Absolutely loved it. Would highly recommend. One of the best books I've read this year, along with One Day. So a brilliant month of February, if you consider that. 2 of my top 3 books of the year were in this month. Another book I read in February was Slow Horses by Mick Herron. Now, you may have heard more of this on Apple TV. If you've got Apple TV, if you don't, I wowould recommend it. Everything on there is banging. But anyway, Slow Horses by Mick Herron has been turned into a TV series starring Gary Oldman. This first book focuses on the first series you'll see on TV as well. It's about I think it's something Cartwright and Jackson Lamb. Now, Jackson Lamb is the focus of the whole series, and he's a big part of this first book. Essentially, the Slow Horses are a group of people that used to work at MI5 that have all done something that means that they've been shunned off to this area called Slough House, which is in the lesser area of London rather than being on Regent Street. They're all in this dirty office, they've all got crap technology, and they all get assigned these really, really dull tasks that do need doing. However, what happens is a really interesting job comes up where essentially a young Indian British boy is taken and essentially live streamed that he's going to be killed. I say young, he's a young man, not a young boy. And it turns out that he actually has quite important parents as well. So what happens is the slow horses, as we're going to call them, are then asked to deal with this. And they're like, why are we being asked to deal with such a big thing? So there's a bigger conspiracy going on here as to why MI5 themselves aren't dealing with it. What's that got to do with it? So interesting story, some really interesting characters. When I first started reading this, I was like, I'm not sure I'm getting this. It was very passive. Nothing was kind of happening, it happened. And I'm not ever that keen on reading something like that. It just doesn't feel that engaging. But then I realised there was a kind of like a humour element. There was a comedic line to it, almost a layer. And that was then I really, really started to enjoy it. And I started to realise that the conversations between the different characters weren't just odd and unprofessional, but that they're intentionally odd and unprofessional, and that Mick Herron wasn't taking this book too seriously, that there is something actually in here that's quite interesting. Now, it's not a comedy, I'd never say it's a comedy, but it's also not as serious as a lot of these kind of thriller crime books can be. But I very much recommend it. I believe I gave it a 4.25 out of 5 on my blog. So as you can see, a great month so far. Nothing yet that's hit below 4.25. So really, really good reading month. If you're into crime books, you could do a lot worse than starting with Slow Horses by Mick Herron. This is a series with, I think, 6 books in it already. So you're jumping into a series there, and they're not that long. So enjoyable series to get into. So yeah, that's Slow Horses by Mick Herron. The penultimate book on this list of books that I read in February, these aren't gone in order because I cannot remember what I read these in order, but The Housemade Secret by Frida McFadden I read in February as well. It's the sequel, obviously, to The Housemaid by Frida McFadden, and it carries on with our same protagonist, the same woman that was the maid or the housemaid in the first book, but she's now moved away. It kind of picks up about a year later, I guess. She's moved away and she's living in New York. She starts housework for another family, and things start to get a bit weird again. So that's basically how this all runs out. It feels very much like The Housemaid. It feels like if she hadn't written The Housemaid, she could have written this, and it would have been the same kind of story. There's your twist in the middle. I know people don't like it when people are told that there's a twist in it, but if you want to... But also, I feel like people are more likely to read a book if they know it's got a twist in it rather than just being told it's good. There is a twist in the middle. Try and work it out. You probably will work it out if you worked out the first one. You might work it out if you hadn't worked out the first one, but now know how this kind of thing works. Either way, still a really, really enjoyable read. Really, really impressed by this. And despite the fact that I was kind of working out what was going on, I was still very impressed by the way that Frida managed to surprise us. Now, unfortunately, I thought Frida McFadden was going to be a big new name on the market, but she's just had a book come out called The Teacher, I think, which people are not rating at all. So I think that's a bit of a slump from her. But so far, I've enjoyed both of the Housemaid books. I think the third one is either out, coming out, just out, those sort of things. So I'll have a read of that one as well, see if that's as good, and then possibly consider Frida McFadden as a thriller writer that I do need to read, and this just new book by her is just a one-off slump, as it were. Maybe not as much passion or something like that was put into it. But either way, really, really interesting. Would definitely recommend The Housemade Secret if you've read The Housemaid. You may find it a little bit predictable, but just try and go into it with a fresh brain and fresh mind and just read it as like a blank story. Don't try not to think too much into what could be happening here. I said the penultimate book, but I do actually have one more book because I finished a book on the day of recording, and I'll go get that in a second. It's not even in the room with me right now because it's literally still downstairs. But anyway, the penultimate book is The Girls Who Disappeared, by Claire Douglas. I read this whilst on holiday, so I bloody loved that. I read it whilst on the plane to Iceland and then on the way back from Iceland as well. It's about essentially 20 years ago in the book, not in real life. 20 years ago, a group of people were on a road. The driver is the only person to have survived. The others, who were the girls, all went missing. Their bodies have never been found. A woman who works for a newspaper wants to start up a podcast, or I think her boss says go start a podcast around the story to try and solve what happens. She ends up getting a little bit too involved. She ends up getting involved with a lot of the town. And obviously, because it would be a dull book, uncovers the mystery of what happened to these girls. Really, really interesting story. Really, really impressed. Usually thrillers like this, I'm a bit like, well, I know what's happening. It's a bit dull, but I was really impressed by this one, actually. I had no idea who it was going to be. There's an interweaving story, and I thought, well, they're going to be involved somehow, but I don't know how. And then it's suddenly like, this person's this person's this person. You're like, without spoiling it. But Really, really impressed. And Claire Douglas does a really clever way of interweaving, as I said, not only multiple stories, but then the conclusion doesn't feel kind of she ran out of ideas and just tacked it on at the end. It felt like she'd written the conclusion first, she'd written the twist at the end first, and then built the rest of the story up around it. So I was really impressed. Some great characters, nobody mind-blowing, nobody I would like kind of stand out and talk about. But I think it's definitely a thriller you should pick up. And I think Claire Douglas is starting to get a really good reputation for writing really good thrillers. I've read this and I read The Couple at Number 9 as well, which I really enjoyed. And I think she's got another one that's just come out that's really good as well. So I might have to pick that one up. I think I might have it down here. My partner buys all of Claire Douglas's books and then reads them and she's a big fan. But that's The Girls Who Disappeared by Claire Douglas. Not rated it as of when recording on my blog yet, but I imagine I'll give it around a 4.25, maybe a 4.5, depending on how I feel about it when I think back at it. Sometimes you don't want to review a book too quickly because of the sentiment. So as I said, I was on holiday at the time, so I could have read garbage and probably given it a decent rating because I was just having a good time whilst reading it. So I don't want to get that involved. But otherwise, a brilliant book, and I definitely recommend this if you're a thriller fan. Then the final book on the list is The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. Now, I'll be honest, this one confused me a little bit. I'd heard a lot of positive things, and I had read another of N.K. Jemisin's book. I cannot remember the name of the title, but you're probably remembering it as I speak about it. It's her rather big, popular trilogy. I think it's a trilogy. This is a duology. I got this for Christmas because I'd seen a lot of hype around it. Obviously, N.K. Jemisin, I think, is becoming somebody that is a guaranteed good, well-written book. This one is based on the idea that there are different parallel versions of every city in the world. This one focuses on kind of like the New York area and all the boroughs, I think they call them. So you've got like Manhattan, you've got Jersey. But essentially, I really didn't understand what was going on. So there's some bad people in this that are trying to, I don't know what they're trying to do. I don't think I understood what was going on a lot of the time. I might have to reread it at some point to better understand it. There are avatars for each of these different areas in New York. So there's essentially a human being that represents that version of New York. They have powers that allow them to do things. There are bad people that are essentially trying to manipulate their level of New York, their idea of New York, and they're trying to stop them. And that's all that I really understood from this. I finished it today and I got to the end and I was like, is that it? I don't feel like a lot happened. There is some action moments. There are some, I don't know, big high intensity moments, but there's also a lot of talking. There's a lot of people being angry with each other and I'm not really sure why. There's a lot of people discovering. A massive part of this was them discovering each other as avatars. And there's like a new one for New York called Manny. And what was odd is a lot of them were very culturally diverse. Now, I have absolutely no problem with cultural diversity in my books, but I found it very odd that they would be represented by that, because that's, if you're going to have an avatar for a specific area, you'd have an avatar for a specific area from that area. Do you know what I mean? You wouldn't have somebody who is possibly from another country. It just seemed odd. Now, it didn't really affect my opinion on the book or on any of the characters themselves. There's some great characters in here, some really well-written ones, some big personalities, which I loved. I just thought that element of it almost felt forced, like they were forcing, I don't know, diversity into a situation that didn't need it. You could have put diversity in here naturally, but they were forcing it in situations where I think it probably wasn't necessarily needed. Other than that, I think fantastic front cover, fantastic rear cover, very odd. I'm going to have to look online to have a little bit of maybe a better understanding as to what was going on to help me encompass generally the idea of the story, because I really feel like I misunderstood what was going on here. And it is a duology, which means at some point I will probably pick up the sequel. But I have not come out of this thinking, yes, I definitely want to read it. It felt odd because at times it felt like a YA book in terms of their young children reacting in young children ways. But then at other times I felt like it was a very adult book in the conversations that were had and the way it was written and the terminology N.K. Jemisin used. It felt very confusing to me. But let me know if you read this one particularly. Of all the books, obviously, I've showed you today, let me know if you read this one particularly, what you thought of it, whether I do need to reread it because I misunderstood it, or if you have a similar feeling to me that you thought, no, that's a bit odd, that one. I'm not really sure what was going on there. But either way, that was The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. So they are the 9 books. I think it's 9, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. Yeah. Books I read throughout February. A good reading month for me, I think. I think obviously you had a novella in here and a couple of them a bit shorter, but there still are some thicker books in here. Oh my God, that's come off my face. Let me know which of these you've read. Let me know what you thought. Let me know which is your favorite. Let me know which you don't agree with my opinion on. Be nice, but do disagree on my opinion if you didn't like them as well. That's the whole point of reading, is some people don't think the same. But yeah, either way, drop a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe, because I'm going to be posting at least once a week, if not twice a week, for the foreseeable future. I'll be around for a while. If you don't like YouTube and you've just stumbled on here because, I don't know, maybe you're old and you're like, what's this new young fangled thing children have been using for 15 years anyway, but you're a big TikTok person, not quite sure how that's the same audience. I'm on TikTok as well. Instagram, Twitter, all of them. Blue Sky, Threads, I'm on all of them. I'm absolutely everywhere. I'm like a plague. And on that, I'll see you in the next video.